Imagine you're walking down a really bustling street, right?
Mhm.
And as you look around at the crowd, you realize something just completely wild.
Oh, yeah, this statistic it's something else.
Right. Like for every 100 people you see, just every 100 human beings going about their day, there are 18 buffaloes.
Yeah.
18. You're just surrounded by them.
It's hard to even picture.
It really is. But that is the actual statistical reality in Pakistan right now. 18 buffaloes for every 100 humans.
It completely reframes how you think about the population density of an entire country. I mean, to really understand the scale of what we're unpacking in today's deep dive, you have to look at the global map.
Right, because we are diving deep into a stack of research specifically on buffalo production in Pakistan today, which sounds super niche, I know.
But it's this massive global economic engine. So there are roughly 170.5 million buffaloes in the world. And out of that total, Asia holds around 97% of them.
Wow.
Yeah. That is 165.4 million buffaloes concentrated on just one continent.
I mean, 97%, that's total monopoly territory right there.
Exactly.
And the sources show that India holds about 59% of that massive Asian wealth, and China holds almost 14%. Pakistan holds 15%, but they have the absolute highest density.
Right. It's the absolute cornerstone of their entire agricultural landscape.
It is. But, before we get into the economics of all this, I realized, reading through this research, that I didn't actually know what a buffalo is.
Well, it's a common misconception, right?
Yeah, like if you grew up in the West, you hear the word and immediately picture the American bison out on the plains.
Right, but the taxonomy is the foundation of this entire agricultural system because it dictates the animal's physical capabilities. So when we look at the old world buffalo, there are three distinct types.
Okay, let's unpack this.
First, you have the African buffalo, or the Cape buffalo. Its scientific name is Cincerus caffer.
Oh, that's the massive one from the wildlife documentaries, right?
Yeah.
The one charging across the savannah.
Yes, exactly. But genetically, it sits on its own branch. The ancestry of the Cape buffalo is actually quite unclear to scientists, and it is not closely related to the Asian varieties we're focusing on today at all.
Got it. So what are the other two?
The other two types are the swamp or marsh buffalo of the Far East, and then the true star of our sources, the water buffalo, or Bubalus bubalus of the Near and Middle East.
Bubalus. I love saying that.
It's a great name.
It is. That's the domesticated Asian buffalo originating across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and China. And, I mean, their physical design is what caught my attention first.
Oh, it's fascinating.
Because they're built fundamentally differently than a cow or an ox, particularly when it comes to the environment they work in.
Right. I mean, they're called water buffaloes for a very literal reason. Their biology is perfectly adapted to paddy farming.
And paddy farming is where the fields are entirely flooded.
Right. Exactly. Paddy farming requires fields to be entirely flooded with water for really long periods. If you put a typical ox in a flooded paddy field day after day, you run into biomechanical problems.
Because of their hooves?
Yes. The hooves of an ox will degrade, and they sink deeply into the mud. They end up burning massive amounts of energy just to take a single step.
Because oxen have, relatively small hooves compared to their body mass, right? So they just puncture the mud.
Precisely. But the water buffalo has this biological workaround. They have large, splayed hooves and incredibly flexible pastern joints.
Pastern joints.
Yeah, it's the joint just above the hoof. This anatomy acts almost like a...
Like a snowshoe.
Exactly like a snowshoe. It distributes their massive weight across the soft mud, so their legs can withstand continual wet conditions vastly better than cattle.
That is wild.
It makes them arguably the most adaptable and versatile of all work animals in a monsoon climate.
Okay, so that explains how they survive the environment. But the research had this statistic about their actual labor output that initially really confused me.
Which one?
The one about draft power. Despite being these massive, sturdy draft animals, buffaloes only make up about 5 to 6% of the total draft power in the region. The cattle are actually doing the vast majority of the daily labor.
Right. Well, what's fascinating here is that the division of labor is hyper-specialized. Cattle are generally faster, and they require fewer calories to maintain.
So they're cheaper to run, basically.
Exactly. So they're out there doing the daily routine plowing and transport. But the water buffalo males, they are reserved for the extreme heavy lifting in cities and villages.
It kind of makes sense if you think about it in terms of vehicles. Like the cattle are your standard sedans. They're out there doing the daily commuting, making up the majority of the traffic.
Right.
But a single male buffalo can pull a load that normally requires an entire pair of oxen. So the male water buffalo isn't a sedan. He's the heavy-duty commercial flatbed truck.
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah, you don't use him for every little errand, but when you have an immense load of timber or agricultural yield that needs moving, you bring in the concentrated power of the water buffalo.
You're trading speed and volume for sheer torque. And, for centuries, that was the primary lens through which the world viewed these animals.
So it's pure mechanical utility.
Exactly.
So we have this animal spending an enormous amount of physical energy pulling heavy loads in flooded, high-resistance environments. Normally, an animal expending that much caloric energy on labor isn't producing much else.
Right, it's an either-or situation usually.
Exactly. Yet, here's where it gets really interesting, because the biology defies expectations. We shift from labor to consumption. This powerhouse of a draft animal also produces an incredibly rich, nutritionally superior yield.
And when we talk about that yield in Pakistan, we're specifically talking about the Punjab province.
Punjab, yeah. Because they hold the majority of the population, right?
Yeah. Punjab houses 65% of Pakistan's entire buffalo population, and they are largely breeding a very specific animal called the Neeli Ravi buffalo.
Neeli Ravi?
Yes. The agricultural literature frequently refers to the Neeli Ravi as the finest dairy breed in the world.
The finest in the world. And the numbers attached to that title are staggering. The sources note that Neeli Ravi produces over 28 liters of milk a day from one animal.
It's an incredible volume.
It is. But it isn't just the sheer volume, right? It's the composition.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us are conditioned from childhood to view cow's milk as the gold standard for dairy.
Oh, absolutely. The Western standard.
We're told it's the baseline for strong bones and protein. But buffalo milk, mathematically, upends that standard.
It really does. The composition of buffalo milk challenges a lot of those assumptions about dairy. For instance, buffalo milk has much higher total solids.
And total solids, for anyone who isn't a dairy farmer, that refers to what exactly?
It refers to everything in the milk that isn't water. So the fats, proteins, lactose, and minerals. Cow's milk generally sits at about 13 to 16% total solids. Buffalo milk contains 18 to 23% total solids.
So it's fundamentally denser. Less water, more actual substance per liter.
It's significantly denser, mostly driven by high levels of saturated fatty acids. And that density makes it structurally superior for producing butterfat, cheese, traditional sweets, and ice cream.
Because you literally get more product per liter than you would with cow's milk.
Exactly.
But see, denser and creamier usually translates to worse for your cardiovascular health in our modern dietary mindset.
Right, you hear saturated fat and you worry.
Exactly. This is where I started questioning the data, because the nutritional profile reads almost like a superfood. I mean, buffalo milk contains 15% more calcium than cow's milk.
It's amazing.
It has 40% more protein, and it has 43% less cholesterol. I just kept thinking, how is an animal grazing on similar forage synthesizing 58% more calcium than a cow?
Well, it comes down to their digestive efficiency. Water buffaloes have a slightly different microbiome in their rumen.
Their rumen being their first stomach chamber.
Right. They are biologically evolved to extract maximum nutritional value from very coarse, low-quality fibrous grasses that cows actually struggle to digest fully.
Oh, I see.
So they synthesize those raw materials into higher concentrations of calcium, protein, and natural antioxidants like tocopherol, all while naturally producing less cholesterol in the lipid profile of the milk.
Wow. And that biological efficiency, it isn't just limited to the dairy. It extends directly into the meat, too.
Oh, absolutely. Pakistan is the second top producer of buffalo meat globally.
Right behind India, I think the sources said.
Yes, they have a very aggressive consumption rate, slaughtering about 19% of their total stock annually. Buffalo makes up over 50% of the local beef production.
And the nutritional breakdown of that meat basically mirrors the dairy profile. When compared to standard bovine beef, buffalo meat is remarkably lean.
It provides only 55% of the calories of bovine beef, but it delivers 11% more protein and 10% more minerals.
And again, 40% less cholesterol.
It outperforms standard beef on almost every measurable health metric provided in the research.
Right. So mathematically, we have an animal that outperforms cows on paper in terms of milk density, calcium, protein, and meat leanness.
It's objectively healthier in several key metrics.
So you would assume that if the Neeli Ravi buffalo is producing this one-class premium product, the farmers breeding them are sitting on an absolute economic goldmine.
You would think so.
But reading the section on the actual economic reality on the ground, it felt like reading a completely different document. The value of the product just does not match the reality of the producer. So what does this all mean?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a severe agricultural paradox. To understand how a premium resource ends up trapping its producers in poverty, we have to split the farmers into two groups.
Because they face different issues, right?
Exactly. Their constraints are systemic but distinct. You have the peri-urban commercial farmers and the remote rural farmers.
Okay, let's start with the peri-urban farmers.
Yeah.
Those are the ones operating large herds on the outskirts of the major cities. I would assume their proximity to the urban markets is a massive advantage.
Well, proximity provides market access, yes, but it removes access to cheap natural resources. For the peri-urban farmers, the crisis is driven by resource scarcity and climate.
How so?
Low rainfall and inadequate water storage in these areas mean there is very little natural grazing land. And remember, if an animal is producing 28 liters of high-fat milk a day, it requires a massive caloric intake.
Right. The research mentions they are heavily reliant on buying grains and cakes, and I actually had to look up the cakes part.
Ah, yes.
They're referring to oilseed cakes like mustard or cottonseed, which are the high-protein byproducts left over after extracting oil from seeds.
Exactly, and that concentrated protein feed is incredibly expensive. Because water shortages limit the local production of those crops, the prices of those feed cakes are escalating rapidly.
So their costs are just constantly going up.
Yes. The peri-urban farmer's profit margin is constantly being eroded by the sheer cost of fueling the animal.
They're essentially buying expensive fuel to run a high-performance engine, and the math barely works out.
Barely.
But the rural farmers in the remote villages, they face an even more frustrating bottleneck. They aren't just fighting feed prices, they're fighting a broken supply chain.
Right. The rural farmers largely keep these animals for their own household consumption, utilizing all those nutritional benefits we discussed. But a Neeli Ravi produces far more milk than one family can drink.
28 liters is a lot of milk.
It is. So the issue becomes milk marketing. The prices these remote farmers receive from commercial milk processing plants are abysmally low.
But why are the prices so low if the total solids in the milk make it so valuable for cheese and butter? It doesn't make sense.
It's because of middleman dynamics and a complete lack of refrigeration infrastructure. Raw milk is highly perishable.
Right, it goes bad quickly.
Exactly. A rural farmer without commercial cooling tanks cannot hold on to the product and negotiate for a better price next week. They have to sell it immediately, often to intermediary collectors who completely dictate the price.
So the farmer has zero leverage. They just have to take whatever terrible margin is offered to get it off their hands.
Yes. But the research highlights another massive issue driving down the price, which is milk dilution and adulteration.
Oh, this part was wild. It completely undermines the premium nature of the buffalo milk.
Adulteration is a catastrophic market failure. Because buffalo milk is so naturally thick and high in total solids, intermediaries in the supply chain frequently water it down to increase the sheer volume they can sell.
Just to make an extra buck. But the processing plants test for total solids to determine the price, right?
Right. So if they water it down, the plants will know.
So how do they get away with it?
To bypass those tests, the intermediaries will add cheap, dangerous thickeners, things like starches, urea, or low-quality oils.
Urea, as in the fertilizer.
Yes. They use it to artificially boost the density readings back up. And this rampant adulteration just destroys trust in the raw milk supply.
So what do the processing plants do?
They lower their baseline purchasing prices across the board because they assume a percentage of the intake is compromised.
And the innocent rural farmer at the bottom of the chain absorbs that financial penalty.
Exactly.
I mean, they're producing the purest, highest quality milk in the world and getting paid bottom-tier prices because the supply chain above them is corrupt.
It's a tragedy.
Okay, so that explains the dairy failure. But what about the breeding and the meat? I mean, if the milk is a bust, shouldn't they be making money breeding these elite animals?
You'd think, but they cannot maintain the elite genetics because of infrastructure gaps. Systemically, there is a severe lack of high-quality breeding bulls in many Punjab villages.
And modern agriculture usually solves this through artificial insemination, right? Allowing the genetics of one elite bull to fertilize thousands of cows across a massive geographic area.
Right. But the research explicitly notes that the orbit of artificial insemination programs simply has not spread to these rural areas.
And looking into the mechanics of that, it really makes sense. Artificial insemination isn't just about shipping a syringe in the mail. It requires a rigorous cold chain.
A very rigorous one.
The genetic material has to be stored in liquid nitrogen tanks, and it has to be administered by trained technicians.
Exactly. And if the roads are poor and the electrical grid for cold storage is unreliable, that liquid nitrogen supply chain just breaks down entirely.
Wow.
The technology cannot reach the subsistence farmers, so their herds stagnate genetically, producing less milk over time, which just compounds their poverty.
So the dairy market is compromised by adulteration, and the genetics are trapped by a lack of cold chain infrastructure. The last safety net should be the meat. I mean, buffalo meat is this lean, high-protein, low-cholesterol product.
But the beef market is equally dysfunctional. The research indicates there has been no significant increase in beef prices to match the rising cost of feed.
Which leads to what is arguably the most tragic detail in the entire stack of sources.
It really is.
So a rural farmer has a water buffalo that gives birth to a male calf. That calf is biologically destined to produce premium, healthy beef. But because the land in Punjab is highly cultivated for cash crops and flooded paddies, there are no vast open grass pastures for that calf to just wander and graze on for free.
Right. The farmer has to actively purchase feed, those expensive grains and oilseed cakes. And they have to do that to grow that male calf for 2 to 3 years until it reaches a viable slaughter weight.
And because the beef prices are artificially low, the total cost of feeding that calf for 3 years is higher than the check the butcher will write them at the end.
It's a mathematical impossibility. A male calf is a pure financial liability from the second it is born.
So the economic pressure forces their hand. The farmers are driven to the early slaughter of day-old calves.
They simply cannot afford to keep them alive.
I mean, they are slaughtering day-old calves of the finest buffalo breed in the world. A breed that produces healthier meat than the standard cow, purely because the local supply chain economics are too broken to sustain them.
And that's the core of it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the failure here isn't biological. The water buffalo is an incredible natural resource.
Right.
The failure is entirely infrastructural. The inability to expand liquid nitrogen cold chains for artificial insemination, the failure to secure fair processing margins by policing milk adulteration, the lack of a graded pricing system that rewards premium beef. These missing pieces prevent the resource from enriching the people who actually tend to it.
It really makes me look at the milk in my own fridge entirely differently. I mean, we started this deep dive talking about the sheer mechanical torque of the water buffalo, how its flexible hooves navigate the flooded paddy fields where other animals just sink.
Yeah, that incredible biology.
We broke down the biological efficiency of its digestive system, synthesizing low-quality forage into milk with 58% more calcium and meat with 40% less cholesterol.
Yet the people managing this biological marvel are just trapped in a cycle of expensive feed, corrupt middlemen, and tragic economic waste.
It really highlights how fragile the global agricultural ecosystem is, and how much of it is completely invisible to the end consumer. It leaves you with this profound sense of untapped potential, which honestly brings up a final thought based on the data we've walked through today.
Oh, absolutely.
Something for you to ponder after we sign off. If simple structural changes, like establishing reliable cold chains for breeding and implementing strict testing to stop milk adulteration, could finally secure fair market prices for these rural farmers, how much more could this underappreciated, nutritionally superior animal disrupt the global dairy and meat trade? Because if 18 buffaloes for every 100 people can sustain the agricultural backbone of Pakistan, despite all these broken systems, imagine what they could achieve if those systems were actually fixed.